Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day on this memorial of the patrons of Europe, who are Saints Cyril and Methodius. And we also recognize your call to lead us to understand that love that you guide us with, that love that you call us to have for others, and that love that leads others to see the light that shines into the darkness. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, actually, as you heard, today is the memorial of Saints Cyril and Methodius. Saint Cyril was a monk, Methodius was a bishop, and they were brothers. They were born about 2 years apart, but they were brothers, and they were great evangelizers, and one form of their evangelization was the Cyrillic, from Cyril, the Cyrillic alphabet, which is used in Eastern Europe, mostly in Russia and all that, and it's kind of a combination of several. And maybe it was, I'm not sure, but maybe it was the Esperanto of its time. Our reading today, as we continue in Genesis, is the story of the flood. Now, one of the most fascinating things about the flood here, there are a couple things we can look at, but one of the most fascinating things, and this comes from various sources, including the National Geographic. So this isn't from Take the Bible Literally Weekly or something like that. Obviously, there's no such magazine. That there was, in fact, a flood. You will find cultures that have no connection to each other. And I love understanding that. Like, one of my favorite things is asking the question, why did the Mayans have pyramids and the Egyptians have pyramids, yet they never met each other? Fascinating thing. Now, it could be something to do with mathematics or something, I don't know, but it was fascinating that you had the Egyptians have pyramids and the Mayans have pyramids. Well, if you look at every culture, as I've been told this, obviously I haven't studied every culture's mythology, but if you look at every culture's mythology, you will see a story of a flood. So many people will say, well, this is just taken from other cultures around the Hebrews, and they're just, no, it isn't. There is a fascinating story. Again, cultures that never connected with each other have a flood story. So we can understand at one time there must have been some kind of a flood story, because all these cultures that are not related had this flood story. Now, we see the reason why the Lord is going to bring about this flood is because of the wickedness of human beings on earth. Where is their wickedness comes from? Well, what did we look at yesterday? And yesterday we looked at Cain, who had the inclination to sin, but didn't have the desire to control that inclination and be focused on the good. And what we talked about with Plato and Socrates of his story of the two horses. So we understand that, the two horses being drawing a chariot. I don't know if I mentioned that yesterday, drawing a chariot. So the charioteer is there to control the two horses. So we have these understandings of the human being. So what happens is people followed the path to inclination to sin, and they did what was evil. Now, some people will look at that and say, well, they were committing some kind of sin, or they were engaged in some kind of sexual sin, or they were... No, the world had become so evil, and what happens is you have a case where people turn on each other. Everyone is there for their own issues, their own... their own desires. So when you have a world of that, you have nothing but a violent anarchy. So that's the description of the world. So what happens is you have Noah and his family, and what are they doing? They're basing their behavior of what we see taught by God to Abel. That idea of controlling their inclinations to do that which is righteous. Most people aren't doing that. And the Lord sees that this is a time to destroy the world. Why must he destroy the world? Because the evil has become so severe that it will poison everything forever. and that's why he must destroy the world. So that's what he does, and he finds these righteous people. Now, notice something else. This is only a short distance in chapters from Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel were in Genesis 4, and now we're in Genesis 6. So there are a call to the animals 2 by 2. Well, actually, the clean animals, there were supposed to be 7 of each pair, and the unclean animals, there was supposed to be 1 of each pair. And that was so that after the end of the flood, that the earth could be populated again with these animals. Now, here's a question to ask. Obviously, they understood what the Lord was talking about. Therefore, they also understood what the Lord was talking about in the previous in the previous day, yesterday, when he's talking about Cain and Abel. And people are saying, where did all these other people come from? That's why I say that's a message there, not to focus on the literal statement, but focus on the deeper meaning in the literal statement. Because you focus on the literal statement, it's not going to make any sense. But if you focus what's really being said there, look what the teaching is, and then you understand that message, then you can see what's going on. So we see very clearly that Noah understood what we would call simple biology. We'll talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to St. Anthony Overnight from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. And don't forget our own website, CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can find that telephone number, CatholicAudiomedia.com. Well, we're looking at this story here about the Noah, and that the Lord is going to destroy the earth because people are following their passions, and in doing so, they're turning everything into a violent anarchy. And the Lord has to take action. And so we see the story of the flood. But as I said, what's fascinating about that is that every culture has a flood story. And so we see that whole issue there, that there really is scientific evidence of the flood. Now, does that mean that I know people say they may have found Noah's Ark. I don't know if that's been confirmed or anything. We see the whole story. But maybe the bigger piece of evidence is, in fact, that there is, all these cultures have a flood story, and there is scientific evidence that there is a flood story. Now, we know, for example, there are fossils from Kansas of underwater creatures. So we know at one time Kansas was underwater. What's the whole mechanics behind it? That part we don't fully understand, but we know that it is it's a reality. So there are two objections to the story of Noah. One is, wow, that's a ridiculous story. Couldn't possibly be true. Okay. And the other one is, it is literally true, exactly what it says. Okay. Well, the fact is, there is scientific evidence of something, and some kind of a flood story. And there's fossils, but there is mythology from other worlds. And again, we go back to that fascinating thing that I told you about. If this was the flood story, and I'll talk a little bit of what I said last week, if this was the flood story, and it's the only flood story, and we can find it in the Bible, and there are no other flood stories, that's one thing. But no, every culture has this. So there's something to this. The other thing is what I said about the Adam and Eve stories last week in Humanis Generis from Pope Pius XII. And what did he say? There were many creation myths. Every society had its creation myths, from the Mayans and the Romans and the Aztecs and the Egyptians, and they all had this creation story. But of those creation stories, this one, the one that we understand in the book of Genesis, the only one that ended up in the Bible. And he said that is significant. So it can't be completely dismissed out of hand. So we have to look at what it actually says. And one of the most powerful things we can see in that is the story of original sin. We know from Greek mythology that evil in the world came from Pandora's box. But we know from the Genesis story that it was people listening to the lies of the devil that they still do today. Did he really tell you that if you ate of the apple, you would die? Well, and then when they eat of the apple, as I said last week, well, they see they don't die because, going back to logic, he said you would die, not die immediately. And that's how we understand death brought into the world. But we see all these fascinating stories, but we always have to remember the ones that are specifically in the Hebrew scriptures, because there's a special weight and a special message to them. We're going to talk more tomorrow. In the meantime, have yourself a blessed day. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation to the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.